Today, we are going to speak about a new and exciting AI tool called NotebookLM. You will find the link in the description. It's pretty easy to get to. You just write notebook, just as it sounds, LM in Google, and you find it in a second. But you find also the link in the description. What can this tool do? Now, the main thing it does is if you put inside it a PDF file, we just ask you to upload the file, you put the file inside it, and then you ask it to create a conversation between two anchors, a man and a woman, that discuss the paper. And they both have insights about the paper. It's just as if somebody would take an academic paper, ask a committee of 3 professors to read and review it and prepare notes for 2 anchors that are top-notch, like CNN, BBC level, and then these anchors would come and discuss the paper very, very well. The quality is absolutely astounding, both in terms of the understanding of the paper, of the details in the paper, the ability to add examples, anecdotes, jokes, metaphors, ideas that are connected to the paper that do not appear inside it. And most importantly, the entire conversation is in natural language and with a natural voice. It's hard to believe that it's not human beings. What we're going to discuss today is how you can use this tool for your benefit, what are its weaknesses, and what are its advantages for you as a researcher. My name is Shai Dotan. I'm Associate Professor of International and Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law, and the purpose of these lectures is to help you improve your English and your research skills. So let's start to discuss this tool. My first impression when I used it at first was it's just something incredible. I mean, I was actually losing faith in the meaning of humanity anymore, because the power of this AI is just unbelievable. Imagine that it takes it about a couple of minutes, depending on the length of the paper, to produce this conversation. And it understood all the major points, and it knows how to connect them. It knows how to create a conversation based on them. It also knows how to discuss them in an interesting, lively way. And as I said, a lot of things that do not appear in a paper manage to find a way into the conversation, and they are completely relevant. So you would say, for example, give an example from something in a field that shows the significance of a paper, even though it's not written in the paper itself. And I say this because I try to use my own paper, so I know my papers pretty well. They managed to think of things that I didn't insert into the paper, and they were just like some intelligent professor in the field would have read the paper, commented on it, discussed the different issues with relation to relevant knowledge, and then give it to an amazing anchor that would do a great job discussing it in a natural conversation and appearing very, very natural. In addition to all that, this is already absolutely incredible, because really the ability to understand the text so quickly and make these connections, build a conversation, is really something that a few years ago, actually even a year ago, I would not be able to even believe existed. But in addition to that, there's also a beta version in NotebookLM that allows you to ask questions in a conversation. So you can have this lady and this gentleman discuss your paper. It doesn't have to be a paper you wrote. It can be a paper that you already read, or a paper that you never read before. And you would be able to intervene at any point in the discussion. And they will be very polite and very kind in inviting you to ask a question. And they would answer it in an intelligent way. And they would answer it in a way that would, try to address the main points that are relevant, try to really explain what it is you didn't understand, or provide the information that is missing to you, and then glide back into the discussion. Now, this version is not 100% perfect yet. Sometimes the discussion is a little bit too long or a little bit repetitive, but they're just trying to, learn how they can best satisfy the need of the person asking the question, which is something that is very, very difficult even for human beings. That's one of the things that you practice when you prepare for giving a presentation. It's not just the presentation without the audience, but answering the audience question, trying to really understand what is the concern of a person asking the question is very, very difficult to do, even for experienced human beings, and the computer does an incredible work doing that. I mean, it's much better than a human being. So to conclude, this is really just as if you would take these professors who would read the papers, analyze the main points, add their own ideas, and then give it to excellent anchors, and these anchors also communicate with you. And then, of course, they also sit in the role of a professor where they know the field, they know why your question is important, and they answer it well. So, incredible tool as it is. And now I'm trying to think about how can we use that. And before I try to think about the uses of this tool, I want to try to understand why there is a certain drawback to this method of learning. And it took some time for me to come up with this drawback, but it took me back to the time when I was doing my PhD in Tel Aviv University at the law faculty. And we had a weekly or bi-weekly, I don't remember, meeting of all the PhD students every year. And this was run usually by a very senior professor at the faculty who would read our drafts, comment on them, and guide us into becoming better scholars. One of my most distinct memories is from the discussions that we had with Hanoch Dagan, who was a professor at Tel Aviv University, later became the dean. Or actually became the dean during the time I was there. So, of course, we all wanted to make a great impression in front of him as the most powerful man in the faculty. And during these discussions, he had a certain word which he kept using in almost every meeting. And it was not even a real word. It was something kind of an exclamation or a noise that you make. It was something that sounded like oomph. Like this. He used to do it with his hand. He always used to clutch his hand and his fist and say, oomph. Now, what is an oomph? Oomph is the most powerful part of a paper. But the definition is difficult, and that's why I used this made-up word. Because it's not just, if somebody intelligent would write a 2-line summary of a paper, what it would mean. And it's not just, the main points it means for the doctrine, or the oomph. I think if I had to explain what it means, it's the reason why we should care about this paper, the reason why it's important for us, how we can use this knowledge, how we can connect this knowledge to a larger schema. For example, as PhD students, how we can use it to improve our dissertation. So it's the importance of a paper. Now, obviously, understanding the details is very important. Getting the structure of a paper, getting the main points, that's part of the oomph. But there's something besides this as well, which I think is crucial for using the paper as a scholar. Now, when I listen to this NotebookLM, and I have to admit, I haven't done it so many times. I just tried a couple of times with my own papers, with other papers that I didn't read. But I did enough trials to get a sense that I'm not getting a real oomph out of this. So just as an example, I used 2 of my papers that I like that are going to lead to a forthcoming book. Actually, the book is not written yet. I don't know if forthcoming is not the right word because it's also not accepted. I have to write a book, but I have a picture of a book in my head, and it's getting more and more precise from paper to paper, and as I read and as I plan. And I listen to this NotebookLM conversation, and I'm telling to myself, obviously, I get all the details. We get all the details right. We don't make any mistakes. Can't say anywhere that we mislead the audience. We have a lot of interesting points, some of them I didn't even think about. They can also summarize the paper really well, and if they don't, when I go into a beta version and I ask them, I tell them I have 2 more minutes, could you please go to the main points, and we'll just summarize the paper very well. But do I really get the point where what will it do for my book? Not so much. And I'm trying to understand what is preventing that. Now, there are several options. One option is it's just not the proper genre to deliver such an oomph. So if you read the whole paper, it will take you 2 hours. You get a lot of details, and from all these details, something emerges, the picture of the importance. You have an abstract of a paper, you can also read only that, but this will not give you all the importance, even though that's kind of the role of that. Neither would the introduction, neither would the conclusion. But all this together would build this oomph, would build this, why is this important? Because it's just like you would create a network with a lot of tentacles that can cling to things around it. And if you get the full network, if you get all the different nodes and connections, then you know how it can connect to a lot of different things. And you don't get that when you just go to the core or the center of this network, as I think that's most of what we get from this NotebookLM. So we get some details, yes, and some of them are important, and we get the most important things out of it as well, but we miss out on why is it important as something that I can use in my research. So it's possible that it's just a genre. I don't believe that this is something that is fundamentally impossible for the AI to do, just because I don't see an intellectual challenge here that is insurmountable. In other words, I don't see any problem with a new NotebookLM version that instead of having a conversation between a man and a woman talking in a natural language in a way that is very, very engaging and fun, would be a Hanoch Dagan AI, who would basically be this very august professor who would say, okay, here's the paper, here are the main points, here's how it relates to the fields, that's why it's important. I am convinced that the AI is at such a level of sophistication where it can do that. In fact, if anything, this would be something that would be easier to produce than the conversation that we see here, that gives you new ideas, new metaphors, new examples, and combines everything into conversation in a very engaging way. So I don't think this is something that is a limit of AI at all. I'm sorry for saying that. I mean, I always, like to feel that we humans are still superior, but for my own personal limited understanding of this tool, I don't think that's the reason. I think that's just something that is part of the genre, and I think, but it's not just the fact that it's a conversation, it's not just the fact that it's natural language, it's exactly the fact of what is it that you're aiming at. So the aim is not to provide researchers with a tool for building the research block after block. Now, what does this mean? This means that the most crucial role of reading papers, the way I used to practice, especially in the years where I read a lot of papers, that was my main thing, is not served by NotebookLM to a sufficient degree. When I was at my prime, after my PhD, doing my postdoc, there was a period when I was in Chicago or when I was going between Tel Aviv University and Hebrew University. I used to read approximately 1 paper a day for workshops. So workshops in Jerusalem, workshops in Tel Aviv, workshops that I taught. It was almost a paper per day, so 7 a week, and almost a paper per day for my research. 2 different ways to build knowledge. One was very eclectic, because I read papers about family law, tort law, for every fields that had no connection to, they were just relevant for the faculty seminar. And these accumulate, and after you've done it for several years, you get very, very good at it. So you're able to do it very, very fast, get to the point, and the knowledge starts to accumulate in a sophisticated way. And the other was learning fields, because I kept writing, and I just read papers that were basically relevant for my field. Now, different fields of science are different than So, for example, I heard that history you mostly learn from reading books. So you read long books, one after the other. But in law, you learn mostly from papers. Books are also important, but papers are really the core. And the nice thing about it is the papers have a lot of footnotes, so they refer to each other. They are designed in a way that is usually quite similar, so you can read them very, very quickly. And when you read paper after paper after paper, and you build some kind of a mental picture of a field, just like Lego, basically, paper after paper, they connect to each other. So that's exactly the way you get acquainted with the topic in law and build a solid foundation of understanding in law. Again, other fields may be a little bit different. I think also in economics, papers are important, and sociology, and other fields I know a little bit less, much less of than I do in law. But in law, that's very, very important. So reading these papers as building law is very important. And what is the most important thing about reading a paper? Getting this oomph. So getting this idea of why is it important. All the details are traceable, especially today, because we have Google Scholar, we can search very quickly, we can ask ChatGPT, which has some hallucinations, but is getting better. But this idea of, okay, I understand how this scholar thinks about this problem, and I try to think about a similar problem in a similar way. This is a thing that is the core of the learning. And I think that the way I was trained, which is really to read a lot of papers for many, many months and years, eventually pays off in the long term. Not everybody agrees with me. A lot of people think it's a complete waste of time. But I really believe in that. I really think that if you are able, because of your life circumstances, to do a PhD for about 5 years, and you use a significant portions of these 5 years to learn fields carefully, reading paper after paper for months and sometimes even for years, this is a very worthwhile investment. And afterwards, when you are in your 40s and 50s, you can crank out papers as fast as you want. You can have research assistants do footnotes for you. You can have them do some of the research. Today, again, you have Google Scholar that is very good, and ChatGPT that is getting better and better, and they do a lot of this work. But all these things have to somehow be in your head. And if you ask me, can I speed up this process and say, instead of reading a paper for 2 hours or 3 hours, should I use a NotebookLM and listen to it for 15 minutes? I would say, if you do that, you will be missing on something important. Eventually, when you sum up these papers in tens and hundreds, you would not get this picture, because you will not get the oomph, you will not get the important parts of a paper as clearly as possible. Now you may ask me, maybe I should read the paper and after I'm done listening to NotebookLM, and that could be a good idea. I haven't tried it over a sustained period to see how well it works, because one possibility would be that if you do that, then the NotebookLM will be more salient in your mind. So you will forget what you thought about when you wrote the paper. As you read the paper, I used to read papers printed out, all of them. And then I would mark on them with a marker, and I would write notes with a pen on the side. And I had a whole library in my home with folders full of papers organized alphabetically. I was this obsessive about it, so that I could basically find them. And in addition to that, I made very voluminous notes on my computer. Should you do it today? I'm not sure. My PhD students, I don't recommend to do that. They have to write a PhD in 3 years. It's just not worth the time. It would add 2 years to the PhD easily. I think there could be replacements for that. But I'm just saying, if you get a feeling that, okay, I read the paper, but then I'm not as careful reading it, or I'm not as careful taking notes, because I am getting myself ready to listen to NotebookLM and surrender to that. Or I did work on a paper well enough, but then after I listened to NotebookLM, I just only remember what they said, because they're so lively and funny and natural when they say that. It's so easy. That's the only thing I remember. Then I say, okay, so skip that. Get the reading done and let the papers accumulate in hundreds in your head, and get ready for your dissertation. And then later on, that's also the way to study a subject. Again, not the same thing in every field, but in law and in political science, international relations, which are also fields that I know better because I've written in them. Even if I wrote to legal journals mostly, I used in some of these papers mostly political science papers. So that's really that's the deal. That's the main thing that builds your research. You just have to read paper after paper, and it doesn't have to be for years. You can say, okay, I do this immersion in the knowledge for a month, for 2 months, and that's what is getting me ready. To my students, I often say, if you're going to write, let's say, an MA thesis, starts by choosing carefully 5 papers, read them, then read another 5 papers based on that, and then you have the base of knowledge you can start to work with. Don't start to write after reading one paper, even if it's the most brilliant paper in the world. It will mess up the way you think. You'll be too close to this paper, and that's not exactly a way to start a research. So it's not a way to build a knowledge base. Not a knowledge base for dissertation, not a knowledge base for an educated paper, not a knowledge base for studying a field. What is it good for? One thing that I find is really nice is if you write a paper, give it to NotebookLM, listen to the conversation. Now you basically get the privilege of seeing people discuss your own work. And you can realize maybe if they focus on something, it's not their fault, it's my own fault. The writing was not that bad, was not that good. So if you do it with a draft, you can improve your paper significantly, and that's very good. And if you use the beta version, which, as I mentioned, is not perfect, but is very, very, very good, you get the benefit even bigger, because you can ask questions, you can direct them, and these are robots, okay? So they don't get tired. You can ask a question in different versions 3 times until you get your answer. Don't be shy. Nobody's judging you. There's no people there. You can always try to improve and get the best answers that you want. So that's something that you can definitely use, improving your own paper. Another method that I think can be useful is if you're just trying to get updated on, for example, a paper is in a conference, not in your field, you don't have enough time. That's actually how I go to NotebookLM. I saw somebody put on LinkedIn that when she can't go to a conference, she used the papers from there. So that's a nice way. It saves time. You can listen to it. Even if you are cooking, exercising, I recommend not exercising, because you know my view that exercise should be wholly and only dedicated to exercise, but some people do that. So I know they can listen to things like a podcast, so you can listen to papers as you go along. Commuting, any situation where you don't feel that comfortable reading, or you want to just make up for lost time, so you can read. In the time it takes you to read a paper, you can listen to 5, 6, 7, 8 papers using this method. So it will not get you to the point when you're an expert on this field. It will not get you to a point where you're ready to write a great paper in the field, but to get you to a point where you are very knowledgeable about this paper. And this was all done with a lot of fun, not so much effort, and very little time. So in conclusion, we have here an excellent tool, a tool that can really give you a a very good overview of a paper with a lot of details that will save you a lot of time. It's fun to use. The only thing that I'm a little bit concerned about is that it will not give you a fundamental oomph, the important part that you need to build a new theory step after step based on a series of papers. And that's what I want you to be aware of, and exercise caution when you use this tool. That is all for today. And as always, I would be very, very happy if you would share with me your comments. Some of you may have noticed that based on a comment that I received from one of the viewers, I decided to add a thumbnail for all the videos. So they're all the same, it's just thumbnail is different, and I'm very grateful for that. So any comment would be very much appreciated. Please like the video and subscribe, and until next time, keep learning.